you, Tim. Really appreciate that. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Got a good crowd here tonight, or today. We're going to talk a little bit about the weather aspects of hurricanes and what we do here at ABC7. Again, we'll kind of go over it and we'll answer some of your questions about the upcoming season. We're going to have a little forecast as well, have some fun. The hurricanes that we're going to be talking about are from the past, obviously, and hopefully we don't see any in the future here on the west coast of Florida. How many people are new here to the Venice Community Center Hurricane Seminar? This is your first year? Good, that's good. A lot of newbies, that's great to know, because I can tell you this, the people that come to these, they've done surveys in the past, and they've found out that people that come to these events that learn about hurricanes do about 80% to 90% better than the people that don't. So you'll get a real treat here, especially from Ed McCrane, the director of the Hurricane, actually Emergency Management in Sarasota County, but hurricanes as well. He's got a lot of information on that. So I've been doing the weather here since 1985. It's hard to believe, 85, right here in lovely Sarasota, Florida. That's the reason why I've stayed so long, because it's such a beautiful place here, right? On top of that, we don't get many hurricanes here. Now, I don't know if that was the reason that I moved here, but the reason was because they had a job opening at ABC7. I took it. I was just out of college, and I said, you know what? I've been to Florida for spring break, and it was a lot of fun. And so my first job was here, and I've stayed here ever since. There hasn't been a lot of storms that have hit the west coast of Florida. In fact, in the nearly 35 years that I've worked at ABC7, we have never had a landfalling hurricane hit since I've been here. Yeah, isn't that good? That's why they keep renewing my contract every year, okay? As soon as that one hits, we're done. Bob, you're out. Yeah, the Indians do something. Now, you may have heard that too. Some of you may have heard that, especially during Irma, there was all this talk about the blessing of the Indian gods. The Indians bless this coast, and so we never get hit here. And you know what? If that's true, I love it. But I have another explanation for it, but I'll go along with it because it seems to work. In reality, and I'll show you a graphic here in a little bit, but in reality, we don't have as many hurricanes here as they do on the east coast of Florida. You know, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, the Keys, even from Fort Myers south, where they get hit more often than we do. And obviously, the Panhandle gets hit a lot more than the west coast of Florida. So we try not to say that too loudly and don't let that out too much, because we want to have a little bit more, travel time, a little less travel time on Interstate 75 and 41. But I think the word's out. I think the word's out though, because the roads are getting packed and there's more and more houses being built here each and every day. This is an important factor there, though, that along the west coast of Florida, the population is increasing significantly. And that goes with evacuation routes. And I think Ed will address that as well. That's a big concern, especially in Venice. Venice has a lot of news about shelters and where they're going to be built, where they can be built due to the storm surge and so on and so forth. And that's always a big issue. In order to have a shelter, you got to be able to get it out of the storm surge area. And if you can't get it out of the storm surge area, a shelter in a storm surge area with a storm surge that gets too high that you can't get to it, medical attention can't get there, then that's not a very good shelter, because a lot can happen inside a building when a storm's around. So my objective is not to scare you, but to prepare you. I know during Hurricane Irma, we had a lot of hype going on. I understand there was a lot of hype going on. Now, I didn't know about the hype on some of the other stations, but because I was busy doing work. I wasn't working, I was sleeping in the little office there at ABC7. Little mattress. John Scalzi used it in the afternoons. I use it in the morning. But we didn't get a chance to see much TV before. The comments that I got from people who did watch some of the major networks was like, wow, I thought we were all going to die. It was terrible. They hyped everything up. And then when the storm hit land and down in the Keys and hit South Florida, they lost the emphasis on the winds. And they said, oh, the storm surge is going to be still huge. It's going to be, terrible. So they switched over from that because they knew they couldn't sell the wind anymore. You have to realize that these national television stations, they do care about us, obviously, but they care more about the people in North Dakota and Minnesota and Wisconsin and Ohio who are watching their program. To watch Florida get beat up. Let's watch Florida tonight, see what's going to happen with them, the hurricanes. And so they sell a lot more soap. That's what they're doing. They're selling soap or whatever they sell during those commercial breaks. And you have to understand also that the Weather Channel is in the business of making money. You know, they're in the business of, we all are, I'm not going to deny that, but when it comes to local coverage, that's what you want to stick to when you're doing hurricanes. Okay, you don't want to do hurricanes very often, but I can tell you this, that local coverage will give you the more information and more refined information from people that you know and people who know the area. Because if you're talking to someone, they say, yeah, you have to go down, you know, this road and this road and this road, they don't know what road, you know, 41 from Jacaranda Boulevard is. So we're here to prepare you, not scare you. I tell all the people at ABC7, all the new reporters, I said, listen, when you go out there, don't put yourself in danger. Obviously, you want to do the weather, and you don't want to do the weather, you want to stay away from that, but you want to do what's happening, what people can do to prepare themselves. Give them information they can use, not that, you know, it hypes it up. It's already hyped up enough. This was just the hurricane seminar. This is my Facebook page, by the way. I'm up in the top left. You can't see it that well, but if you want to go during a hurricane in a situation where there's bad weather, if you haven't done so already, and if you're on Facebook, how many people are on Facebook? I know you hate to admit it sometimes, but I do too, but I have to be on it because it's my job. But if you're on Facebook and you haven't liked Bob Harrigan, ABC7, and you can't read that there, but it's not the Bob Harrigan, that's my personal page. You can't get on that anymore because I got 5,000 people on that. But the other one you can, Bob Harrigan, space ABC, space 7. And I must tell you that it's going to be loaded up full of people when there's a hurricane around, and I will be able to give you information that I may not be able to give you on television quite yet because, you know, there's a commercial break or something going on, but I'll be able to answer your questions too if you have concerns. So again, write that down, know that address, and I'll be with you guys through the hurricane as long as the electricity stays on and the power didn't go off and the internet service doesn't go off. I'll be on there. It's never really been tested. You know, the hurricane coverage, more and more people are relying on social media and relying on their cellular phones for data and information. Be careful because, you know, when a hurricane comes through and it's intense, it can't cut off internet. It happened with Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy a few years ago when it came up to New York, it flooded some of the electronics down there in the subways and cut off the internet access, along with electricity, but also your internet access. So that's always an important point to remember. This is just a graphic that shows all the storms from last year. And all the storms from last year, thankfully, missed us. But there was the first storm that developed out of the season. It developed in May. You may recall, Alberto, right? Alberto developed, and it was in the Caribbean. That's where they typically form. So the first part of the season, these storms develop in the Western Caribbean and also the Gulf of Mexico. So we have to be alert here along the west coast of Florida really early because we have an impact here on the west coast. It'll be early in the season and then the latter half of the season. And you know what happened in the latter half of the season? We had Michael. Michael developed kind of where Alberto developed, same place. And you know, Alberto was a very weak, it was called a subtropical storm. You may recall that, it was a subtropical storm. That's just a fancy name for a tropical storm that has its winds away from the center. The strong winds were to the right of the center. So it wasn't a true tropical system. So we call it and define it as a subtropical storm. But we know what happened with Michael. Michael went from a tropical depression, in 3 days after, it went to a major Category 5 hurricane. We saw with Irma 2 years ago. What did that do? For weeks we were able to watch that storm and eventually have an impact on Florida. So my point is this, is that when these storms are around, they behave just like their names. They're all individual. They have all different kinds of personalities when they come ashore. You can't just take one textbook hurricane and say, this is what it's going to be like. They're all going to be different. Every one of them are going to be different when it comes to these storms. This is 2018, a busy season. Florence and Michael, again, that looks like an old 1960s satellite imagery from my perspective, but it's a lot better than that, believe me. We have the Hurricane Michael and also Florence. Now this was Florence. Florence was a big storm, and again, Michael was the biggest storm. We've only had 4 Category 5 hurricanes. You may recall just recently that they upgraded, right, Hurricane Michael to a Category 5. What happens is the real-time data comes in, and the real-time data comes from the airplanes and some of the ground, recordings. But then they get access to a lot more data after the storm has passed, and they can analyze and do a lot more analyzation of what happened with the storm. So they determined after a year, just about, that hey, Michael was a Category 5 hurricane. Same thing happened with Andrew. Andrew in 1992, when it slammed Miami, was a Category 4 hurricane, or classified thereof. A year later or so, they brought it up to a Category 5 hurricane because they did some more analysis of the anemometers and found out they were underreporting, and they had more data to look at. So they do this, and so again, Category 5 hurricane. Notice the date. It's October 10th. Most people think it's what? August and September, right? It goes June too soon, July stand by, August it must, September remember. No, wait, September, I can't remember it now. September remember, October it's over. October it's not over. October it's still going on. And especially for us in Florida. We get hit by more storms in October than a lot of the other months. In fact, I have a graphic, if you'll be able to see it, you'll see that we have, October is a tough month for Florida, especially the West Coast. Back in, again, this is a long, long time ago, 1944. The West Coast of Florida did get hit by a hurricane that did make landfall. And I always say, where were the Indians then? That was a bad year, huh? A bad year for the Indians, to bless our coast. 1944, the storm was a Category 3 hurricane. That was October 19th. October 19th. So it's not just August and September. It can happen in October. And in fact, October, I think, is the scariest month for the West Coast of Florida. The picture on the right is what happened with Harvey. After they got 60 inches of rain in Texas. 60. That can happen. Unique storm. On the left is Florence. That dumped, only about 40 inches of rain. You can see at the top there, 35 inches plus at Elizabethtown, North Carolina. This is all the different reporting of rainfall. If we were to get 30 to 40 inches of rainfall here, everyone would have flood problems, okay? Not just the coastal residents. We're talking freshwater flooding. And that can happen if a storm stalls. And it's not, it's not unlike for a storm to stall during the season. It can be a very significant problem. We saw it with Harvey. We saw it with Florence last year. And I can tell you this, that a lot of people don't realize, you see the strong winds with hurricanes. That's what everyone sees and remembers from the media, from the video. The reporters bracing themselves. Look at that, the wind's bad. But it's still raining. The rain is what really is what you got to look out for, because the flooding can be significant. And most of the people who lose their lives, it's a result of freshwater flooding when it comes to a hurricane. It's not the wind, it's not the storm surge, it's freshwater flooding. It can be a real devastating problem. With Florence, and these are the past line. You see that line? It's called the Cape Verde storm. Cape Verde, whatever you want to call it. Comes off the coast of Africa. One thing I noticed with Florence, it was a kind of a weird storm. The forecast, the intensity forecast, showing right here. So it starts off as a tropical depression, the yellow line, and then it goes to the red line, and then it goes to the purple line. Well, that purple line is a major hurricane, okay? And then it goes to the yellow. Well, the forecast, when the storm was here, was suggesting that the storm was going to strengthen, and stay strengthened all the way through here and then weaken. It was way off. And then eventually it pops back up to the purple, major Category 4 hurricane again. That was not in the forecast. So you can imagine sitting there on the southeast coast of the United States going, what's going on with this storm and what's going on with the National Hurricane Center? Why are they projecting that this storm is going to be, a weak storm when it's a strong storm, and a strong storm when it's a weak storm? That happened. It happens quite frequently when it comes to intensity forecasting. The reason why I tell you this is that you could, sit here and debate, are we going to stay? Should we stay or should we go? It's an old Clash song. I don't know if you guys remember. Anyone remember the Clash? I was just saying, some people know the Clash. Should I stay or should I go now? Anyway, the point is this, is that you can't make your decisions based on, they're saying it's going to be a 2. Or they're saying it's going to be only a 1. Storms do weird things. I remember one storm that was heading toward Louisiana, and it was supposed to be like a 4, right? It's supposed to be like a 4 hurricane. This was a day out. All of a sudden, it weakened to a Category 1. Made landfall. Everyone's happy, right? Well, the people who left, because they thought it was a 4, going to be a 4, next 4 that came around, I'm not leaving. They said it was going to be a 4, it was a 1. I could have stayed here, not spent all that money at the hotel, and yada, yada, yada. So keep that in mind. When it comes to intensity forecasting, it's not always accurate. In fact, you could almost get a dartboard with a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and throw a dart. And you'd almost be as good as they are in 3-day forecasting when it comes to intensity. And they admit it. The Hurricane Center admits it. So they have their best guess. They usually err on the side of caution. Sometimes it doesn't work out. What they are good at is projecting where the storm's going to be in 5 days from now. And they're getting better and better and better at that. And when I say they, because that's the National Hurricane Center located in Miami, all right? We, as meteorologists on television, we don't sit there and plot where it's going to go. Any meteorologist you watch, anyone, the Weather Service gets it from the Hurricane Center, okay? The Weather Channel gets it from the Hurricane Center. CNN, Hurricane Center. ABC 7, Bob, Hurricane Center. No one gets it from anywhere else but the Hurricane Center. So if you ever get somebody that says, I got my forecast, don't believe them. AccuWeather tried it once in Texas. AccuWeather wants to take over the National Weather Service. They're based out of Pennsylvania. And I remember it had to be over a decade and a half or 2 decades ago where they said, I think our models are going to be better. We're projecting this storm. And we're going to do our own hurricane projection on it. We're going to get rid of the National Hurricane Center for this one. Well, they did it and it was wrong. And a lot of people, lost their homes or whatever. And so they got in a little trouble and lost confidence, right, in the people. So the Hurricane Center uses all the different forecast models, and then they have a team of experts that look at the models and see which one's performing good, which one's performing poorly, and then they kind of give more weight to that particular model and suggest which one's doing the best. And they do a kind of a grading after the season too to see which one did better and which one did best. The European forecast model has been doing really well, exceptionally well lately, but the United States just pumped in millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into their computer system just a few years ago because of what happened with Sandy. The European forecast model, the only model that got Sandy right when it hit the east coast of the United States up in New York. It was the only one, 2-3 days out. All the other ones had it going out into sea, whereas the European had it bending right back toward New York and New Jersey. And you got to rely on your country, so they said, well, how can we make our models better? And what's the answer always? More money. Show me the money. And so they increase the computers, and GFS, I must say, is doing better. And I'll give you an example. They just don't predict hurricanes. They predict weather like today. And 4 days ago, 3 days ago, I think 3 or 4 days ago, the European model was not saying any rainfall for here. None. It showed it breaking up, getting out. The GFS had the rain coming. And had some showers and storms, had a few thunderstorms. And then the European the next day, same thing, no rain, kind of breaking up right before it reaches us. And then the GFS kept along with it. So 2 days ago, the European finally started to show some rain coming into Florida, west coast of Florida. And the GFS was right there. So I noticed something weird, it was kind of weird. The GFS started backing off then. It's like, you're watching me, I'm gonna throw you a little spin here. I'm not gonna do it. But anyway, that's about modeling, a little bit about modeling. My point to you about that is that when the hurricane forecast cone of uncertainty comes out, and that's what it's called, the cone. You guys have all seen the cone, right? The cone of uncertainty. That is the place where the center of the storm is going to be or projected to be in 5 days from now. It's not where the rough weather is going to be. It's where the center of the storm, which usually has the strongest cells, is going to be in 5 days from now. They're usually about 80 to 85% right. There are some times that center is going to be outside the cone in 4 or 5 days from now. That cone of uncertainty has dropped in 5 days as far as the air goes. It's down to 300 miles as opposed to where it was up to 1,200 miles when I first started this business of weather forecasting. So that cone is getting better and smaller and smaller and smaller. There's a reason for that too, is that it helps us prepare who's going to be impacted, and it limits the amount of coastline that's going to be under a hurricane warning. You have to realize that when they put a warning up for the entire coast, that means everyone springs into action. That means a lot of money too. Businesses close down. Beaches aren't taking reservations anymore at the hotels out there. Things happen when there's a warning. So if you can narrow that down, you're going to save millions and millions of dollars. And that's pretty much what they've done over the course of the years. Again, this is Florence. What happened after Florence? Look at that. This could be any neighborhood in Venice, any neighborhood in Sarasota. When you get 30 to 40 inches of rainfall, you're going to get a lot of standing water. I know back in the early 90s we had some rain. It was a tropical low kind of, it wasn't a tropical storm, it wasn't a hurricane, and it dumped 17 to 18 inches of rainfall up near Fruitville, I-75 in the Lake and Ranch area. In fact, Sarasota, a lot of it, all of it. Every exit out of Sarasota was flooded. You couldn't get out. Now Venice, I don't think it was okay down here, but the main rain came there, and every, Bee Ridge, University, Fruitville, you couldn't get on or off the interstate because there was so much rain that had occurred in just a day and a half there. So that's always a little bit of a thing I want people to know, is that this flooding is a real deal, and is, I think, the worst case scenario for us here along the west coast of Florida. This is the roadway. You can see that car. That car's making a bad mistake. Why is that car making a bad mistake? You don't drive in the water, you can't tell the depth. There were roads that washed out, and there are roads that can just kind of, and you don't know it, there's just a big gap there, a big part of the road washed away. And then you're driving along and all of a sudden, you know, it's only 2-3 feet, and then the next thing you know, your car is buried and floating away when it comes to that. So turn around, don't drown. There's no chance of risking it. Now, 57 deaths occurred with Hurricane Florence. 30 direct deaths, and direct deaths mean this: wind, you know, a tree, you know, branch, whatever, you know, even lightning can occur. 27 indirect deaths are more so like, you know, carbon monoxide poisoning, some other things that may have occurred that not directly related to weather, okay, can occur. In fact, the indirect deaths we have to be concerned about. You know, we can all tell you, and Ed will tell you how to protect yourself from the wind and the rain, right, and the waves. But it's the after effects of a hurricane that can get you. And that's the important point to make, is that they're starting to find out that we're teaching everyone right about what to do, you know, to prepare themselves for the heavy winds, strong waves, and all that. But what about fixing your roof afterward? What about walking around, falling? What about, you know, using a chainsaw that you never used before to cut limbs out so you can get your car out? You know, things like this. These are the things in carbon monoxide poisoning. People, it happens every year. We saw it with Irma. You know, obviously it was a big deal on the East Coast at the retirement community, and people heating up there. They didn't have a backup generator, and one of those, and you'll hear about it each and every year, that someone starts their generator, they put it in their garage because they don't want anyone to rip it off, and the next thing you know, they're dead because of carbon monoxide poisoning. So the indirect deaths are very important, and I want to get back to that graphic real quick. There's a 59% of the people who die from hurricanes, tropical cyclones, from 70 to 1999 were from freshwater flooding. That's pretty shocking if you think about it. Wind was only 12%. So the wind is really what TV likes, because they like to show the wind, you know, the signs getting blown apart. But in reality, the freshwater flooding isn't very, you know, very sexy, so to speak, to put on television. You get a lot of eyes to watch it. So keep that in mind. And tornadoes are very small, but they can't kill, obviously. Look at that. Totally different storm. We saw the flooding. This is a totally different storm. This is Michael. Michael's personality was strong wind, 160 miles an hour wind, sustained, and a huge storm surge. The storm surge wasn't the problem. Florence was basically the heavy rain that sat around there for days and days and days. And just look at all that debris cleanup. Well, I grabbed this graphic because look at October. I told you about October surprise. This is, by the way, Michael. And this is October, and look how close it is to the west coast of Florida. I can tell you this, that I'm glad the Indians protected us here. But if there was a little trough of low pressure that was coming down just at the right time from over Texas, if there was just a little trough, just a real small little storm system, that this storm could have just very easily bent into our coast. Would it have been a 5? Well, it might have. It might have been a 4, it might have been a 5, but it doesn't matter. A storm that's already a Category 2 is going to cause significant damage to our coast here. And I told you the storm about 1944. That was a Category 3 storm. Well, a couple of scientists and meteorologists did a survey, or a study, I should say, just about a decade ago. And they projected that same storm that happened in 1944 on our coast today, and it would have cost our area here $19 billion worth of damage. So they projected that storm on our coast today, and that storm would have cost $19 billion. And that was 10 years ago, so it's probably up to 25. $25 billion worth of damage. Now, you have to remember in 44, how many people were here in 44? I sometimes get one. No? The point is, there weren't a lot of homes here, there weren't a lot of buildings here, right? There wasn't a lot of structure here, but now there is. And it will be devastating if we ever get one here. And will we get it this year? No one knows. No one knows. And if any meteorologist goes on the air and says, yeah, they're all going to hit up in the, the mid-Atlantic coast states this year. We looked at this, we looked at that, we looked at this. I've talked to hurricane directors in the past. I've talked to all of them. In fact, about 5 different hurricane directors. And they say these people that come out with that is just trying to get some eyes to watch them. And that's what it's all about. The clicks and the views and everything else. I remember one guy, he's okay. His name's Bastardi, Joe Bastardi. He works with AccuWeather. He did at the time. Remember I brought up AccuWeather before? Well, he went on the air prior to the season on a network and said, this is it. This is the year. I'm telling you, we checked all the past history, 1925 to 1935, and the same kind of, and the Mid-Atlantic coast is going to get slammed this year. So if you live in the Mid-Atlantic coast, you should be really prepared to get hit by hurricanes this year. Well, you know what happened. Not one hurricane hit the Mid-Atlantic coast that year. And that's the beauty of being a weatherman. You can be wrong, usually only half the time, and still keep your job. I'm getting a little better than that. But the point is, he was brought back on a network to be questioned on it. Well, what happened, Joe? What happened? Well, this came along and this came along. Weather people are great at explaining what happened. Why I got it wrong is a perfect example. But he was called on the carpet. So the point is that these forecasts, the people that come out and talk about, where they think it's going to hit. And Scott Dennis, the news anchor, came up to me just the other day and said, I just read a report that said it looks like the Gulf Coast states are going to get hit this year. I said, yeah, okay. That's nice. I'm going to start coming up with my own, Obviously, I think Maine's going to get hit this year, really bad. People in Maine are going to hate me, but that's all right. But then the thing is you can't really use that. But I just want to show you that graphic. Interesting thing to note about this storm, it went from a tropical depression, 35-mile-an-hour wind, to 145-mile-an-hour wind in less than 3 days. So I showed you the other graphic, the Florence. That was over a week and a half you could watch that storm coming. This one, 3 days. And I had a congressman ask me, that was a pretty quick storm, wasn't it? I said, well, they can be. Sometimes you only get a day's notice that a storm's coming. You can only get a day's notice with some storms. So think about it. Today we could be sitting here, and I can go on the air tonight and say, hey, we're watching a little disturbance off the Yucatan Peninsula right now. And then 24 hours later, it's a hurricane on our doorstep. It can happen. It has happened. We saw it with, I think, Alice a while back. Allison. This is what the storm surge did to Mexico Beach, I believe. You can see all the slabs there. Again, the slabs are just wiped clean when it came to that storm surge. The storm surge was 14 feet high. The storm surge, the highest it can get here in Venice, is 18 feet. In Northport, in the Port Charlotte area, you can get as high as 28 feet in a worst case scenario. And it's not a wave, okay? I want to let you know, a storm surge isn't just this big wave that comes in, like a tidal wave. It's not. Storm surge is a gradual building of the water along with the tide that continues to get higher and higher as the storm center approaches and to the right of the center of the storm. So the worst case scenario for us here in Venice would be if a storm were to be moving from the Gulf of Mexico, all right, and then develop here and slowly gather strength and get stronger and stronger and then build up all the water in its center and have all this time to do that and then slam at a 90-degree angle into the coast. Does that happen? Not very often. Typically storms come in and hit our coast, they come through the Caribbean, come on up here, and then come this way, or they hit up toward Louisiana or toward Texas. Very seldom do you see a storm develop here and then go in this direction. It did happen with Wilma in 2005. Wilma did develop right off the Yucatan Peninsula. It was a very scary storm, by the way. It was, I think, in October, and it came right here and hit into Marco Island, Naples area, and caused the most damage I've ever seen in Fort Lauderdale as it moved off to the East Coast. That was a scary storm for us. You know, that could have been a very devastating storm. It was at one point right here a Category 5 hurricane off the Yucatan Peninsula. Luckily, it stayed there for a few days, and the upwelling, the water got colder underneath it, so it weakened it before it made landfall into Naples. So again, lots can happen with these storms, and I'll zip through some of these things real quickly with you. This is that rapid intensification I told you about with Michael. Here it was on a Monday. It was just now beginning to be a tropical storm, and then it was forecast to be a major hurricane. The first forecast that came out with it was just showing a Category 1 hurricane up in the panhandle of Florida. Those people up there going, oh, Category 1, we can deal with it. Not a Category 5. I mean, that's tough going. So, and you see that bend? You see that bend it made? So it gets parallel with our coast, right? Parallel with our coast. And then it starts to turn right. That's why we're blessed here on the west coast of Florida. It's called, we're being saved by our latitude. We're right at the right latitude that when storms get into the Gulf of Mexico, they eventually get picked up by the northern, the mid-latitude cyclones. So the mid-latitude cyclones catch them and then start to bend them off toward the right. All right, but they don't usually do that until they're past our latitude. And that's the reason why we've been saved here along the west coast of Florida for so many years. It's because of that reason. It's more to do with our latitude as the Indians. But I'll take both of them. I don't care. They're both good. Michael, look at that. Category 5 hurricane had less direct deaths than Florence. That just shows you Michael was a wind and a wave storm, and Florence was a rainstorm, flood storm. A 14-foot surge. Thankfully, you know, and it's not that great news for, you know, the Panhandle. It was the strongest storm ever to hit the Panhandle, but it hit in a very light populated area. If you think about it, what if it were to hit Tampa or St. Pete or even here? I mean, this is a lot more population than Mexico Beach. You know what I'm saying? A lot more populated people here. So the hurricane season outlook, how they do? They all underperformed. They all said it was going to be kind of a weak season. It turned out to be just slightly above average. We had 15 named storms last year, and they were projecting only around 12 about the average. So we were above average, slightly above average when it came to that. We had 2 major hurricanes. This graph you can't really see, but what that is a projection of El Nino, our friend El Nino. If you ever want to see something funny, watch, I think was it Chris Farley? He does an impression of El Nino. From Saturday Night Live. It's really, what does El Nino mean? It's the Nino. It's the warming of the Eastern Pacific, which causes less storms in the Atlantic Basin. Okay? So we're going to see fewer storms if El Nino is happening. Right now, the projection is that we're going to see a weak El Nino to a light El Nino. But they're not always right in the projection. All those lines are different forecast models that don't always work. So that's somewhat beneficial news, but again, I don't care how many storms there are out there. We have to realize that it doesn't take but one storm, and we learned that with Irma to make it a very active season. This was Irma. You can see, I want to thank Cuba, by the way, for weakening this storm and disrupting its flow. Thankfully, it too hit in an unpopulated area in Cuba where it could have been a lot more population there. But at that point, it was a major hurricane. When it emerged off of the Cuban coast, it was still a major hurricane. But its flow had been disrupted by the mountainous terrain of Cuba. Had it not done so, it would have stayed over the intense warm waters and would have stayed as a strong Category 4, possibly 5 hurricane as it moved into the Keys. A weakening storm is a lot better than a strengthening storm, okay? It makes sense. But when I talk about categories, so a Category 4 that's weakening as it makes landfall is really better than a Category 3 storm that's on the verge of becoming a 4, which is gaining strength. It's just the way these storms operate and how they spread their winds and how their wind field expands. So again, Cuba helped us out there. As well as the dry air, we look at the upper level winds. This is the dry air. This is around 30 to 35,000 feet. And this area represents dry air, and it got entrained in the center of that storm. And thankfully for that, the storm did weaken, and we never saw it too. How many people were here for Hurricane Irma? And okay, so we were in Venice or somewhere in the west coast of Florida. I can tell you this, that it was a Category 2, and it will be defined as a 2 going through DeSoto County and into Hardy County. That was a Category 2. We never had hurricane force winds here. in Sarasota County, sustained. Okay, sustained hurricane force winds where they were 75 miles an hour or greater. We had gusts up that high, hurricane force gusts, but never had sustained winds. So you can't really say, and what happens with people is a lot of them think, okay, I've been through a Category 2 hurricane. No, you haven't. A Category 2 hurricane, if you're in the core of the strong winds, you can then say, yeah, I was in a hurricane Category 2, and I know what it's like. Problem is that a lot of people that lived through Andrew say they were in a Category 5, but they were nowhere close to the core of the 160 mile an hour winds. And they did a survey and found out that people just think they were in a hurricane. They can make decisions based on that. Do not make decisions based on your prior experience with storms, okay? They're all different. People did that with Katrina. In Katrina, the people in Mississippi who had lived through Camille in '69, which was a Category 5 hurricane, made it through. They made it through in '69. They saw a Category 5 coming. Camille had 200 mile an hour winds, and they made it through. They said, okay, here comes Katrina. Oh, this ain't got nothing on, it ain't got nothing on Camille. I went through Camille, I'm staying. Well, Camille was a different storm than Katrina was. Katrina had a much higher storm surge, actually, than Camille did. Katrina had the highest storm surge ever recorded that hit the United States when it came ashore. It was 28 feet, I think, 28 feet high storm surge. We can get that maybe in Port Charlotte, but here I said 18 feet is about as high as it goes because of our shelf. But these are new maps that are put out by the National Hurricane Center. So each year they have new graphics and so on. So this is storm surge potential. This was the storm surge potential for Hurricane Irma, for Venice. And you can see right there, there's South Venice, there's Venice, and the area in red is plus greater than 8 feet. So it could have been as high as 12 feet, it could have been as high as 14 feet. They only go greater than 8 feet. So that's the projection. Could have been devastating. The only way that could have happened, though, is if Irma would have stayed out in the Gulf of Mexico. It had to stay out in the Gulf. There was no way you're going to get a storm surge if that storm stays, center stays. No way to get a significant storm surge if the center stays over land, and it did. Thankfully, it went right through the spine of the state. So we were spared when it came to that massive storm surge. National Hurricane Center did pretty good. This is their forecast for the center 5 days out. And I tell you, this is the initialization of the storm. The center line is the projected path of the center of the cone. And I talked to a hurricane director, Max Mayfield. He said, on my tombstone, I want people to say, do not follow the center line. Because if you do, it can change your decision making, okay? So you gotta think of yourself as the cone of uncertainty. This center could be almost anywhere. This is the best guess based on previous models. The air to the right and to the left is shrinking considerably, and the Hurricane Center and your tax dollars are starting to help with that. Notice the projected path, though, is on the East Coast, basically, right? 5 days out. Well, it could have been anywhere. It could have been over here. It could have been over here. That center could have been any direction there. The models weren't really certain. They have to go on many different models, and there they are. There's all the models that they had to look at. And you can see that. This is the spaghetti model, if you will. They call it the spaghetti models, or linguine, whatever you want to call it. You know, sometimes it's just a straight rigatoni, I guess. I don't know. But this is all out here and all out here. Florida's somewhere underneath there. So they kind of get the best path and which one's going the best. They throw some of these out. Sometimes they weigh a little bit more the right side or the left side, depending upon how that's particularly doing. So they did pretty good with that one. Again, this was that same year. This one kicked it off, right? Everyone forgets about Harvey because we had Maria and Irma. Harvey, 60 inches of rain. That was in Houston. And you can see the bullseye right there. This is, again, Texas. And this is the track. You see the track? It came up. Forget about it. I'm going to go back here into the Gulf of Mexico. Upper level steering currents were not very prevalent, weren't very strong. So it came back out here and spent 3 days out here just pumping water, showers and storms, one after another, into southeast Texas, causing 60 inches of rainfall in some, the most ever, by the way, of a hurricane or a tropical system to produce that water. No one even remembers how intense it was. It was the wind, too, caused big problems in South Texas. I mean, it did a lot of damage, but it was the rain and the flooding that occurred afterward. So real quickly, the first major hurricane hit the U.S. since 2005. That was the first one to hit since 2005. And that was, a 10-year drought. We hadn't been hit by a major hurricane for 10 years. That was a big drought. And now, what is it? We had, Michael, Category 5. Year before that, we had Irma. Year before that, we had a storm that people may not remember, Matthew. Matthew worked up on the east coast of Florida. That was a major hurricane. That was a Category 5. So the trend is that we're starting to see more and more of these major storms having an impact on the United States. The costliest, get a look at the cost in there. I don't know if you can see that, but I'll read it to you. The costliest hurricane was Katrina. That's cost the United States the most money so far. That's $161 billion. But then you got Harvey at $125 billion, you got Maria at $90 billion, and you've got Irma at $50 billion, all in 1 year. Well, Sandy, yeah, I left Sandy out because it was in 2012. Sandy, by the way, wasn't really classified as a hurricane. It became a non-tropical system before it made landfall. And the Hurricane Center actually did some changes after Sandy, because what happens is that the National Hurricane Center no longer really tracks a storm once it loses its tropical characteristics. That used to be the old practice. So once it developed a cold core, it's called, the center of the storm gets cold all the way through up it, they said this is no longer, it's a hybrid hurricane, and I believe that they kind of dropped the watches, because it's not a hurricane, you can have a hurricane watch. That's no longer the case anymore. If a storm transitions to some sort of other kind of storm, they're still going to be calling it a hurricane, and they're still going to keep the hurricane warnings up and the hurricane watches up. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And by the way, Katrina, that had the storm surge up to 28 feet high, what they did after that storm is they said, we're no longer going to classify a Category 5 and a 4 and a 3 hurricane with storm surge. So storm surge is not in the equation anymore. When they say a Category 5 hurricane's coming, that's based on wind speeds greater than 155 miles an hour. It has nothing to do with storm surge. It used to be that they clump those together, that if you get a Category 5 hurricane, you're going to get a storm surge somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 25 feet. What happened with Katrina, it was a Category 5. It went down to a 3, but the storm itself kept a Category 5 hurricane storm surge with it. So the people made bad decisions saying, well, look, they're projecting it to be a Category 2 or 3 hurricane when it makes landfall. And if I open up and look at the definition of a Category 2 or 3, it doesn't say anything about a 28-foot storm surge. So they said, no longer do we do that, and storm surges are going to be out. And the reason why I mentioned that to you, because you can't be in an area that's under a hurricane watch or warning and still get impacted by a huge storm surge, even though you may be out of the strong wind area. It can happen, and it will happen one day here. You know this guy? Does anyone know him? He's a prognosticator of hurricanes, Dr. Philip Klotzblau. And he's a good guy, kind of looks like him. What, me worry? I'm not worried. He lives in Colorado. Why should he? He makes projections on hurricanes. He went to Colorado State University. He's a great guy. He likes to mountain climb where there are no hurricanes. His projection this year is for 13 named storms, 5 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. A pretty typical year. Pretty typical year. But just think about it. What if 13 of those storms all hit right here? That's not typical. That'd be atypical. And in 2004, we had 4 hurricanes hit the state of Florida. That was atypical, but it happened. Who would have said that 4 hurricanes are going to hit Florida in 2004? No one would have said that. It just happened. So I'm worried every year. Don't worry about the projections. We'll go through some of this. This is the cooling of the Atlantic. This is where it was. Interesting, as meteorologists, we go back and look at things. And this is all cooler than average water. You can see the blue there. I can tell you there weren't a lot of hurricanes. This was in May of 2018. This was the coldest it's ever been in this area prior to the hurricane season. And there were not many hurricanes at all that developed in that region. So you'd think, well, we'll look and see what's going on. Is it cold this year? We hope it is, because there's not any major hurricanes. Well, this is this year, this is April, and notice it's warm there now. So, but I looked back and looked at more stuff and more data over the years, and it doesn't have much credence to it yet. All right, so I would not base any forecast based on the cooling of the waters of the Atlantic in that particular area as we're safe. We saw what happened with Michael, even despite the fact there were no hurricanes that really developed in that region. This was Alberto. Again, it wouldn't take much for a storm to move to the east in that situation. That was early on. And you see your name there anywhere? Anyone got a name up there? These are the names of the season for this year. Again, you can see Andrea is the first storm up. Some of these names are repeaters. We've used them every 6 years. They use the names over every 6 years unless they retire the name. Andrew's retired, Michael's retired, Harvey's retired, Irma's retired, Maria's retired, Bob's retired. Bob was the first one that's ever retired, actually. It was the male name. That was due to a storm that hit up near Kennebunkport, up there where the president resides. So they won't use, what's it called, Bunkport or something? Yeah, Kennebunkport. So anyway, it was Bob, B-O-B Bob. That was the first male named storm, and the first one to be retired. And by the way, hurricane season ends on my birthday. So it's all Bob related, you see. It's all Bob related. No more Bobs. But you know, we had to deal with Alberto here once. We also had to deal with Gabrielle. How many people here for Gabrielle? Not many, but I tell you, Gabrielle was a tropical storm that caused power outages all up and down Venice, all up and down Sarasota County, Manatee County. There were over 450,000 people without power due to Tropical Storm Gabrielle back in, again, 2001. September 11th, right around then is when it formed. So you remember what happened in 2001, September 11th, when we were dealing with a tropical storm, which knocked power out to many, many places. We hope we don't get to this one right here. If Wendy happens, we're in some serious trouble. That's a lot of storms. And Wendy will take care of that. Wendy Ross from ABC 7. She'll do the forecast for that. So those are the names. You know, I asked the hurricane director once, I go, what's the number one question you get? He goes, the number one question I get, surprisingly, is, when is my name going to be put on the list? I want my name on the list. Well, you know what they're thinking about doing? By the way, if your name is Wendy or Van, or you're in some of those other ones, you know, down low in the alphabet, you never get used. You're always there. You never get used. So they're thinking that they may eventually have to start where they left off in the previous season and use some of their names. That thought has crossed their head, and they may do that. So they can help out with some of those people with, you know, P names like Patty or Paul that never get to be a hurricane, you know. They want to have a hurricane named after them. This was, again, for El Nino. It's a weak El Nino year. The models were wrong last year. They said it was going to be an El Nino year last year. It really wasn't until after the season was over, so these models can be wrong. And the El Nino that they're projecting this year is for a weak one. It wouldn't take much to keep it a neutral one. It means we'll have a normal season here. El Nino, what it does, it rips the tops off of the storms. And so it doesn't allow them to vertically stack. The good thing about El Nino is usually the major hurricanes that really need the light winds and the upper levels of the atmosphere can't get going. So your major 4s and 5s will have a hard time generating. So that's what El Nino does for the storms in the Atlantic Basin. This is kind of an interesting graphic. This is the Caribbean, and when El Nino is around, it's the storms in October and November named storm formation, and so this is a major hurricane strength. So we only had one hurricane when there's been an El Nino in the Western Caribbean in October and November, which have a big impact on our weather. All the blue dots in a La Nina cooling of the Eastern Pacific show all the major storms which have an impact late in the season in the Western Caribbean. It's a big difference. Now that correlates. That is something you can rest your hand on and say, you know what, that makes sense. Not the cooling of the waters of the Atlantic before the hurricane season starts. I know you can't see that very well, so I'll move on to these graphics. What that says is it only takes one storm. That was 1992. I think there were only 6 named storms that year. And one of them was Andrew in 1992, in August, okay? It was Category 5 hurricane that hit right across Miami and then eventually went up toward Louisiana. In 1907 named storms, okay? And there it is, Andrew, 175 mile-an-hour winds. That's what they brought it up to. That's the sustained winds that caused all the damage. That's a composite picture of Hurricane Andrew. Again, just narrowly missing us. And thankfully for the land in Naples and Fort Myers, where it did go over, it was only, when I say it was only, it's still a problem, but it was only, I think, a Category 1 hurricane as it made its way through the west coast of Florida. So we lead the way. We're number 1 in number of hurricanes. You wouldn't know it, you know, but we do. This is the different states. Texas is number 2. You can see there in terms of landfalling hurricanes. So it does happen. This is data based on from 1873 to 2012. So we get more hurricanes here than any other state. And there it is. There's all the tracks. You know, with this thing messed up, I can't even see Florida, but it's somewhere in there. There's a lot of tracks that have happened over the years. This is over 100 years worth of data, and I'll push it. There we are. You can see us a little bit. But if you were to see this graphic in true color, this area here does not get hit as much. And that's simply because of our latitude. It's our latitude. Okay? It's all about the latitude when it comes to these storms. For you guys, you know, we're not here to scare you. We're going to teach you what to do today to prepare yourselves. I'll give you the weather inside information real quick. I'm just going through this El Nino stuff. By the way, some people want to know about the global warming, right? Is it causing an impact? Is the climate change causing an impact? I got to tell you, my job is to stay away from that because it's too politicized. I have a hard time predicting the weather 7 days out as opposed to 10 years or 20 years down the road. I'll let the experts do that. I've talked to both sides of the issue. They all said that still, we're still looking at data, but this is from a hurricane standpoint. If you look at the globe, if you look at not just our basin, but you look at the entire globe of the Earth, the Atlantic and the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, you see that center line, that red line, the hurricane energy or tropical cyclone energy has actually gone down. And you wouldn't know that because there's a lot more coverage of hurricanes now in tropical systems that we never used to know about. You have to realize if there's a hurricane going over, Japan or Southeast Asia somewhere, you see it. It's a lead story on the news. Before, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that wasn't a lead story. They couldn't get the data to you. Now with technology, you're seeing everything everywhere. So it may seem like there's a lot more going on. However, from this graphic, from the scientists suggesting that it is going down. Now, does that mean we're going to see fewer storms because of climate change? No one knows. No one knows for certain with that. We see bigger storms because of climate change? Maybe. The important point is that some people are using data to show what they want to believe. But all I can do is say, hey, we got a hurricane season coming. It's 7 days out. We're watching this little area of disturbed weather here. Thanks a lot. We'll be back at 6. I'll tell you more. I'm not saying anything else about that, okay? So again, this is interesting, again, showing this. Now the blue, and I believe, is the impacts of Texas. So this is August, right? Texas has more of an impact because storms get into the Gulf of Mexico and they continue to move on that track toward Texas or toward Louisiana. By the time we roll around into September and into October, Florida really starts to get up there because, again, you start to get those mid-latitude cyclones that come down. So instead, where Texas is, there's a cold front coming down, or there's a low pressure system coming down through Texas. So the storm tries to go out toward Texas, and then all of a sudden, it can't go any further because there's a mid-latitude cyclone coming. So it heads back toward the east and hits an impact on the Florida Panhandle or over North Florida. So that's about it for this slide presentation. Ed's going to talk about what you can do. I can tell you this, is that the number one thing that you guys can all do here is make a plan. Obviously, you've heard that, make a plan. What's a plan? Every plan is going to be different, and you have to have one in order to get through these hurricanes, okay? Season is pretty easy. One thing I tell people is that you guys are more danger for injury or loss of life each year from lightning than you are hurricanes. So keep that in mind. This is your first summer down here. How many people's first summer? First summer? You know what storms are. With lightning, we're known as lightning capital of North America here. We have more lightning here than anywhere else. And so I usually tell all the people this that are thinking about staying here or maybe going to Arizona. We have a lot of hurricanes, a lot of lightning, a lot of snakes, a lot of alligators, a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of love bugs. So they all go to Arizona so I can have more tea time during the summer months here, okay? That's my only reasoning. No, it's really nice down here. I know Ed's coming up soon.